H.R. 3811, a bill to require notification of individuals of breaches of personally identifiable information through exchanges under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act.
Pursuant to House Resolution 455, the bill is considered read. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts, and the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, will each control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, in the days leading up to Christmas, hackers stole millions of credit card numbers from the servers of retail giant Target. I imagine that at least a few here in this chamber may have had their own credit cards replaced to prevent theft. What if Target had not bothered to tell anyone? What if they had waited until people noticed fraudulent charges popping up on their statements? The damage would certainly be worse. It may shock some people to learn that there is no legal requirement that the Department of Health and Human Services notify an individual if his or her personal information is breached or improperly accessed through the Affordable Care Act's exchanges. While HHS has said that it will notify individuals in such a case, the American people have a right to know that their government is required by law to contact them if their personal information is compromised. H.R. 3811, the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act, would simply ensure Americans receive notification from HHS when their personally identifiable information has been compromised through the exchanges. Specifically, the bill requires HHS to notify individuals no later than 2 business days after discovery of a breach of an exchange system. Since the disastrous rollout of the Healthcare.gov website, congressional oversight has uncovered that end-to-end security testing of Healthcare.gov did not occur before the October 1st launch, and that high-ranking administration officials were told of the security risk before the website went live. Teresa Fryer, the Chief Information Security Officer for the agency running the exchange system, even stated in a draft memo that the federal exchange, quote, does not reasonably meet security requirements, and there is also no confidence that personal identifiable information will be protected, end quote. A recent article in Information Week discussed a report released by Experian entitled 2014 Data Breach Industry Forecast, which stated that, quote, the healthcare industry by far will be the most susceptible to publicly disclosed and widely scrutinized data breaches in 2014. According to Information Week, the author of the study said he is basing this prediction at least partly on reports of security risk posted by the Healthcare.gov website and the health insurance exchanges established by various states. The web infrastructure to support health insurance reform was, quote, put together too quickly and haphazardly, end quote. The most glaring problem for these sites has been their inability to keep up with consumer demand. The organizational infrastructure behind the implementation of Obamacare is also complex, meaning that many parties have access to the personal data and could misuse or mishandle it. Quote, so we have volume issues, security issues, multiple data handling points, all generally not good things for protecting protected health information and personal identity information, end quote. Given the lack of security testing and the risk associated with Healthcare.gov and the administration's repeated misrepresentation of the website's readiness and functionality, H.R. 3811 is a reasonable step to ensure federal officials are required to notify individuals in case of a breach. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to point out that Republicans are using out-of-context quotes from an administration or from administration officials to mislead the public about the security of Healthcare.gov, the website. The same official they keep quoting went on to say, and I quote, "The added protections that we have put into place are best practices above and beyond what is usually recommended." And no website is 100% secure, but this effort to scare people from signing up for coverage is simply wrong. Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the bill before the House today is simply an effort by Republicans to continue to impede the efforts of implementing the Affordable Care Act by instilling misinformation and fear in the American public. It's an egregious bill that would, in my opinion, let me point this out, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I was in the Rules Committee, and I pointed out that to some extent I was pleased, I guess, that I don't see the Republicans actually coming to the floor today to act on another repeal or outright repeal of the Affordable Care Act. I mean, we're not seeing that. We didn't see it in rules, and hopefully I'll say to my colleague, the chairman of the Health Subcommittee, that we don't see it again either in the committee, in rules, or on the floor. So maybe there's some progress here, and at least the Republicans are not out there trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act anymore. At least I hope so. But they're now moving to these other methods of trying to put fear into the public so that they don't sign up or they don't go on the website. And the fact of the matter is that these security measures that they're talking about are addressing a reality that's not there. Do I think that security measures are critical for the website? Yes, absolutely. But let's recap the last few years since the ACA passed. Republicans claim the ACA kills jobs, but since the law has passed, we've added nearly 8 million jobs. Republicans claim that the ACA causes health costs to increase, but the last 4 years we've seen the slowest health care cost growth in 50 years. Republicans claim we need to address the deficit, but yet they repeal the law at every turn, which increases the deficit by over $1.5 trillion. And now they say the Healthcare.gov is going to result in widespread breaches of people's personal information, and that's simply not true. There have been no successful security attacks on Healthcare.gov, and no one has maliciously accessed personal information. No website, public or private, is 100% secure, but Healthcare.gov is subject to strict security standards. It's constantly monitored and tested, and its security and privacy protections go beyond federal IT standards. And the Health and Human Services Department has standards in place, just like every other government agency, to notify individuals if their personal information is breached. So, Mr. Speaker, it's important that I know for everyone that House Democrats have always previously supported legislation to require consumer notification in the event of a breach of government and private sector computer systems. We still do. By expressing concern for the mockery of this bill, it does not mean that I don't support requiring the administration to notify individuals of breaches of their information. But this is not a serious effort to strengthen privacy laws or to strengthen the healthcare website. The Republican strategy is to scare people away from going to the website and signing up for healthcare, and I urge members and the American public, do not be fooled by what they're doing. It's a good thing that they're not seeking to outright repeal the Affordable Care Act anymore. At least that appears to be the case based on what happened in rules the other night. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to continue with these efforts to try to make hay over security and other matters. And, you know, I can't stress enough that every one of the scare tactics they use, whether it's saying that, you know, the ACA is going to increase the deficit, which it doesn't, it actually decreases the deficit, or whether they say that it's going to increase health costs, which we know it doesn't, it actually decreases health costs. This is just another one of those scare tactics, and I just hope that my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, are not fooled by this. So I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, Mr. Issa, California.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Famously, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." That's not true here, and sadly, the last speaker is entitled to his opinion, but the facts do not bear out his conclusions. The truth is that actual interviews and depositions taken of the highest-ranking people that helped develop this website, both public and private, shows there was no end-to-end testing. It did not meet the spirit of any definition of a secure website. In fact, the highest-ranking person, Teresa Fry, on September 20th, was unwilling to recommend this site to go active and said under oath that if it had been within her authority to stop it, she would have. It is very clear, even from the White House's statements in the last few days, that they claim to have mitigated or have a plan to mitigate significant security risk. The American people need to understand a plan to mitigate means they have not mitigated security risk. This is the situation we're in which no private sector company, including Target, would go live with a system that has known failures and unknown failures because of a failure to do end-to-end. All we are asking for is, since Secretary Sebelius, under oath, has been wrong on multiple occasions, and I've called for her to make clear that she made false statements, the fact is, what we need is a law that makes it clear that they should do the right thing, not say they have always done the right thing and they will do the right thing, because in the case of Healthcare.gov, they launched a site that was neither functionally ready nor had it been security tested, and it had known failures that were not mitigated prior to the launch. Those are the facts, Mr. Speaker, and I ask for support of this bill.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. DeGette.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some mornings in Congress I wake up and I say, now here's a solution in search of a problem, and this morning is one of those days. We are hearing about how the website's not secure, how there can be security breaches. Ironically, we're hearing about security breaches with a private company, Target, and how terrible it is, and that's why we have to do a bill. But in fact, we haven't seen any security breaches with Healthcare.gov or the websites around the Affordable Care Act. And I want to stress that. I'm the ranking Democrat on the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce, and we've had a number of hearings and we've had classified briefings. And here's some information that is not classified information. There has been not one successful hack into Healthcare.gov. Let me say that again. Nobody has successfully been able to breach Healthcare.gov. Furthermore, as we recently learned in a briefing, Healthcare.gov, interestingly, has not been targeted any more than any other federal website for hackers. So why are we doing this bill? I've got to associate myself with my ranking member's comments, Mr. Pallone, that the only reason we could be doing this bill is to try to have a chilling effect against people signing up to get health insurance through the websites. And so let me say again, there have been no successful breaches of Healthcare.gov. Now, if we really wanted to do a bill that would strengthen privacy, I would be all for that. I think that consumer privacy is one of the most important things we can do. But really, when you look at the details of this bill, there's nothing here that furthers consumer notification or consumer privacy. First of all, there's no exemption or consideration of law enforcement. What if law enforcement found a potential breach and needed to investigate it? What if they needed more than 48 hours to make sure that in fact there was a breach before they notified people? Consider the harm that would occur if law enforcement did not have enough time and resources to fully investigate a security breach before it went public. The consequences of hasty and incorrect notification could just make the problem worse. Secondly, based on how the bill is drafted, if there's a data breach in a state that's chosen to run its own exchange, like my home state of Colorado, HHS seems to bear an unnecessary burden of reporting the breach in the state exchange, having nothing to do with the federal exchange. Might I remind my colleagues, state exchanges are entirely independent from Healthcare.gov. HHS does not run them. HHS did not build their websites. And HHS did not develop their security protocols. So why should HHS have to get involved in these state exchanges? I ask for an additional minute, Mr. Chairman.
An additional minute to the gentleman.
Thank you.
The gentlelady is recognized for an additional minute.
Thank you. So security for these state-based exchanges should be the responsibility of the states that are running them. I could go on and on. There are more problems with this bill than pages in the bill. So let's get real. Instead of bringing legislation like this to the floor without any committee action, why can't we sit down together in a bipartisan way and improve the way the Affordable Care Act works for our constituents? That's what our constituents want. They want affordable health insurance, they want health care, and they don't want unwarranted scare tactics and attacks. So let's sit down, let's work together, let's fix this legislation, and let's get real. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased this time to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Black, who's an expert on this issue.
Gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today in support of this legislation to provide basic diligence to the federal Obamacare exchange. If someone's personal information has been breached, the federal government should be accountable and be required to notify them so that they can protect themselves from either identity theft or cyber threats. This is common sense, as data breach notification is required on most of the state-run exchanges, and there are laws that require information that has been breached by private businesses to notify people as well. Yet, when HHS was asked to insert notification provisions into the final rule for Obamacare, they specifically declined to do so. This is an astonishing failure on the part of the administration, though sadly characteristic of how they have proceeded at every turn with the implementation of this train wreck legislation. Healthcare.gov has been described by the former Social Security Administrator Michael Ashew as a hacker's dream, and last month HHS reported that there had been 32 security incidences since its launch. The federal exchange potentially puts at risk Americans' names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, email addresses, and even Social Security numbers. Last month, I introduced similar data breach notification legislation, and I'm pleased to join my House colleagues now to pass this important bill. Mr. Speaker, I can't imagine explaining to my constituents that I voted against this common sense measure to protect the hard-working Americans from identity theft and cyber attacks. And this is why I urge my colleagues to support this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the ranking member of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
I thank the
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I thank the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey for yielding. I'd like to make 2 very, very simple points. First, the Affordable Care Act is working. Hello, it is working. It went into full effect, if you didn't know, on January 1st. And now millions of people are getting health insurance they did not have before. Imagine what this means to families. Not only are they receiving critical medical care, but they have the security of knowing they will not go bankrupt if they get into an accident or they get sick. That's major. The law also put in place key protections for consumers. Insurance companies are now prohibited from discriminating against people with cancer, diabetes, or other pre-existing conditions. And some young people in my district said, well, Congressman, I'm not worried about pre-existing conditions. I told them, you just keep on living. They may not charge higher prices for women. And millions of people are now receiving free preventative care. There are also huge financial benefits. Health insurance companies are sending rebate checks to millions of people. Since the law was passed, we have seen the lowest growth in healthcare costs in 50 years. And if we repealed the law today, it would increase our deficit by more than $1.5 trillion. Despite all of these positive results, Republicans are still obsessed with killing the law. Since they cannot do it legislatively, they have shifted to a different tactic, scaring people away from the website. So my second point is this: there have been no successful security breaches of Healthcare.gov. Let me say that again. There have been no successful security breaches of Healthcare.gov. Nobody's personal information has been maliciously hacked. All week, Republicans have been trying to make their case for this bill by quoting from a memo drafted by the Chief Information Security Officer at CMS about concerns before the website was launched. But they omit one critical fact. This official never said the memo. It was a draft, and she never gave it to anyone, including her own supervisor. How do we know this? Because she was interviewed by the Oversight Committee, both Republican and Democratic staff, weeks ago. May I have one more minute?
I yield the gentleman additional minute.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for an additional minute.
And she told us this herself. Her draft memo did not take into account mitigation strategies put in place days that followed. Importantly, she also told the committee she is satisfied with the security testing being conducted. When asked to describe the security measures now in place, she called them, and I quote, best practices above and beyond what is usually recommended, end of quote. These are important facts for the American people to know, but the Republicans disregard them and omit them because they want to undermine their claims. Many of us would support efforts to strengthen requirements for the entire federal government and private sector to notify consumers of breaches. But today's bill does not do that. Today's bill is the latest attempt to attack the Affordable Health Care Act and deprive millions of Americans of the health care they deserve. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished whip of the House, Kevin McCarthy of California.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act. The reason why we are passing this important legislation today is that credible and documented fears have been raised that this hastily constructed Obamacare exchange websites could jeopardize the security of our most sensitive personal information. One of the many reasons so many worry about Obamacare is that it injects government and government bureaucrats into the most personal sphere of our lives, our health care, in new and alarming ways. Nothing can turn a life upside down more quickly than identity theft. It is our duty as members of Congress to do everything in our power to protect and inform Americans about these potential devastating events. I am confident that this one is one of the law's most negative consequences that both sides of the aisle can come together and agree and must be addressed. Absent its full repeal, instilling this type of transparency and accountability into Obamacare is a worthy first step. I urge my Democratic friends to join with us today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, Republicans continue to attack the website, Healthcare.gov, and this attack on the security of the website is just the latest in a long line of scare tactics attempting to limit enrollment and coverage under the ACA. It just bothers me so much because, as you know now, we have, I think, about 6 million people who have obtained coverage, 2.1, private insurance through the website. And things really are moving now in terms of more and more people signing up and getting coverage. I just wish that rather than use these scare tactics and try to talk about security concerns that don't exist, that they would focus and work with us in actually trying to sign people up and get people to have health insurance, which is the goal, of course, of the Affordable Care Act. The bill suggests that there are serious security problems at Healthcare.gov, but by establishing this unique requirement, which doesn't apply to other government websites or to private websites, and the HHS is required to notify individuals within 2 business days if their personal identifiable information is known to be stolen or unlawfully accessed from a marketplace computer system. If this is a good idea, why is the GOP bill limiting this requirement to only marketplace websites? It's just a missed opportunity. Democrats firmly support strong data security and breach notification legislations. If the Republicans were serious about the security of personally identifiable information on the web, instead of bringing up this bill, they could have reached out to Democrats and developed a bipartisan bill. Indeed, when Democrats were in the majority, the Democrat-run House passed bipartisan legislation to provide for consumer notification in the event of a breach, was introduced in the previous Congress. And the Republicans are still playing political games. If they want to work with us to bring to the floor a serious bipartisan data security and breach notification legislation, then they should simply do it. In the Rules Committee the other day, one of the members asked on the Republican side if the administration has a position on the bill, and the administration clearly opposes the bill. They put out an SAP which states that the administration believes personally identifiable information should be protected wherever it resides and that all Americans deserve to know if that information has been improperly exposed. The federal government has already put in place an effective and efficient system for securing personally identifiable information in the health insurance marketplace. So they oppose passage of this bill. I just wish I could convince my colleagues. Again, I'm happy that this is not an outright repeal, and we're not wasting time on that. But we're still wasting time with this notion of a security breach that hasn't happened when security measures are already in place. And again, this is being brought up in the first week we're back. No effort to reach out to us in any way to try to deal with this. It has a 2-day notification requirement, which is simply not workable. I cannot stress enough that we as Democrats would like to address this issue, but it's not being addressed. It's just being done as a way of trying to fear the public, scare the public into signing up on the website, which is so unfortunate because people want to sign up. They shouldn't be in fear that if they sign up, somehow there's going to be a security breach. I would reserve my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'm pleased to yield 4 minutes to a distinguished member of the Health Subcommittee, Mr. Bill Rockus from Florida.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act. I'm pleased to be an original co-sponsor of this legislation, and I'm glad we're addressing this very important issue on the House floor today. Each day I hear from constituents in Florida's 12th Congressional District who are experiencing the negative impacts of Obamacare. Contrary to the very promises the law was sold on, my constituents have lost their health care coverage, have seen their premiums rise, and were forced to choose new doctors. Now they're faced with concerns regarding their personal information and whether it is compromised, all because the President's signature law was never really ready for prime time. The Energy and Commerce Committee, which I'm a member of, has held numerous hearings into the failed website and the lack of testing that occurred to ensure the website was properly secured. In these hearings, we have learned that 30 to 40% of the website isn't built. End-to-end security testing wasn't performed. CMS's own Chief Security Information Officer recommended against an authority to operate because of cybersecurity concerns. Her memo even stated there is no confidence that personal identifiable information will be protected. And it was the administrator of CMS, not the Chief Information Officer, that signed off on the ATO. Mr. Speaker, does this sound like a safe and secure website? Millions of Americans were forced to sign up for the exchanges in order to avoid individual mandate fines. And now each of these individuals, including myself and many in this chamber, are potential victims of identity theft. While privacy in the healthcare realm is typically protected by HIPAA, it does not apply to HHS or the federally run exchanges. Furthermore, data notification is critical to maintaining security, and individuals should be notified when their personal information could be compromised. Yet in the final rules HHS published in August, it did not finalize a data breach notification rule. Instead, it stated that it is up to CMS to determine whether a risk of harm exists and if individuals need to be notified. A government bureaucrat, Mr. Speaker, should not be given the power to determine whether the loss of personally identifiable information constitutes harm. We do not know how many breaches have occurred on Healthcare.gov, whether due to the accidental sharing of information or otherwise, because there is currently no public disclosure requirement. The Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act will bring accountability and transparency to the administration and the healthcare exchanges. I strongly urge my colleagues in the House to support this bill today, and I urge all, of course, our colleagues in the Senate to swiftly take up this bill so that we may pass it into law. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Florida yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield such time as he may consume to the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Waxman.
The gentleman from California is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The previous speaker in this debate said we don't know how many times there was a breach of security on the healthcare website. Well, we do know how many breaches of security there were, how many successful attacks there were. 0. There have been no successful breaches of Healthcare.gov. Mr. Speaker, since October 1, more than 6 million Americans have signed up for health insurance. 6 million, 4 million are enrolled in Medicaid, 2 million in private coverage. Any way you look at it, that's good news. Now Republicans seem eager to find some bad news. They want to keep talking about website problems and stir up phony fears that personal information is not secure on this site. They're looking for the bad news because the facts are against them. Republicans said the Affordable Care Act would kill jobs. We hear it over and over again, kill jobs. But since the law was passed, we have added nearly 8 million jobs. Republicans said this law would cause health care costs to skyrocket. But we've had 4 straight years of the slowest health care cost growth in 50 years. Republicans said the ACA would explode the deficit. But repealing the law, which they've tried to do over 40 times on this floor, would increase the deficit by over $1.5 trillion. So today, House Republicans are resorting to scare tactics. They're bringing up a poorly thought out bill based on false premise that Healthcare.gov is not secure. The truth is, I'll say it again, there have been no successful security attacks on Healthcare.gov. Now, while no site, public or private, is 100% secure, Healthcare.gov is subject to strict security standards. It's constantly monitored and tested. It has procedures in place to notify consumers in the event of a breach. We can't say the same thing for private websites. We all heard about Target having their website attacked successfully. No one's asking that they make disclosures. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, this is not a serious attempt to address this issue because it doesn't set any standards on private insurance companies. Private insurance companies hold far more private data than the exchanges. Mr. Speaker, as chairman, I worked on bipartisan legislation to set tough data privacy and security standards on government and private sector computer systems. House Democrats have supported these efforts. But this bill is not serious. Did you know this bill was never even considered in committee? It doesn't allow for any delay in reporting to protect ongoing law enforcement investigations. The bill creates a host of technical and administrative problems. This is purely a message bill. That's all we do these days. In between recesses, we have message bills on the floor of the House, and we get nothing done. This is purely a message bill, and the message is one that is designed to mislead. I urge a no vote.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to our distinguished Majority Leader, Eric Cantor of Virginia.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank the Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Mr. Speaker, I want to rise in support of the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act, and if I could just take a few seconds to respond to the allegations put forward by the gentleman from California, the ranking member on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I want to just make a point, Mr. Speaker. There is a real difference between users of a retailer's website and users of Healthcare.gov. Because those who choose to go on a website of a retailer in the private sector do so at their choice. The people of this country, all of the American people now, if they go to Healthcare.gov, they are being forced to go to Healthcare.gov. And so for the gentleman to sit here and say, well, we don't require this, that, or the other of industries or banks or anything else, which I would beg to differ. There are certainly requirements at law and duties owed by banks to their shareholders, customers, and the rest. But I would say to the gentleman, this is a situation where the law at hand is requiring individuals, mandating them to go to this site. And so contrary to the allegations made by the gentleman, what this bill does is it just asks the administration, it requires it to provide 48 hours notice within a breach of healthcare information, financial data. All it says is the administration has to let victims of identity theft or information theft to be notified. That's it. This is a good government bill. Why do we want to wait until there is a data breach? You know, I would ask the gentleman to look to a quote by CMS's own Chief Information Security Officer, Teresa Fryer. She said, quote, the healthcare industry by far, she said, the federal exchange does not reasonably meet security requirements. That's what the chief cybersecurity officer at the agency says. The exchange does not meet security requirements. Now, the Experian Credit Bureau said the healthcare industry by far will be the most susceptible to publicly disclosed and widely scrutinized data breaches of 2014. If we know this, why wouldn't we take precautions to help people? That's all this bill does, is it says if there is a risk of data breach, we should afford people opportunity to take corrective action immediately. That's it. There's no message in there. This is just trying to help people. So I would say to the gentleman, if he would just set aside the partisan attacks for once, let's help people. Let's go about the way we should be and putting people first here. We disagree on this law and requiring health care the way government says we should require, yes. But I think we can all agree we want to help people and we want to make sure that they can keep their information safe. That's all this bill is about. So I want to thank Chairman Fred Upton, Chairman Joe Pitts, and the members serving on the committees who've been conducting oversight on the issue for the past year, including the Science Committee, the Homeland Security, and the Oversight and Government Reform Committees. Congresswoman Diane Black, certainly the gentleman from Florida, Gus Bilirakis, and Representative Kerry Benevolio have all worked hard on this issue. I commend them for their efforts to just help people for once. And with that, I urge adoption and passage of the bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield such time as he may consume to Mr. Waxman.
Well, thank you for yielding. I'm not going to take that much time.
Recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take that much time, but I do want to respond to the comments that were just made on the House floor. No one is forced to go on this website. No one is forced to buy their insurance by going on the website. They could go to brokers. But once you sign up for insurance, whether it's public or private, your information is in their web. It's in their computer system. And that is true for private insurance. Does this bill do anything about breaches of private insurance? No. Now, the majority leader used a quote from someone in the administration, I think, to mislead the public about the security of the Healthcare.gov. But that same official who said that, the same official said at the end of that quote, the added protections that we put into place are best practices above and beyond what is usually recommended. No website is 100% secure, but this effort to scare people from signing up for coverage is wrong. If we do care about breaches in security, it ought to apply to private and public insurance, not just when you sign up, but when they hold your data. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 3 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this legislation, H.R. 3811, the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act of 2014. Security and transparency, both are critically important to every American, and the public expects and deserves to have them both when it comes to health care. Sadly, I believe the administration has failed to deliver. This important bill seeks to provide peace of mind to folks in Michigan and across the country who have submitted personal information to a federal health insurance exchange. Americans have the right to know in the event that their sensitive personal information provided to an exchange is compromised, especially as it is the law's individual mandate that forces them to purchase the government-approved health care coverage. Why wouldn't we want the public to know and be alerted right away? Just this morning on CNBC, breaking news, CEO of Target apparently is indicating that as many as 70 million Americans, their customers, may have had their private information stolen. Would it have been right for Target just to sit on that information? Or was it appropriate for them to try and put the word out so that they at least, the consumers have the right information? Let me tell you what this bill does. It's a common sense bill. It's going to require that the administration promptly inform individuals within 2 business days if their personal information has been stolen or unlawfully accessed through an exchange. And through the Energy and Commerce Committee's thoughtful oversight, we have uncovered troubling information regarding the security of the health laws exchanges. So what this bill does, it's preventive medicine. Do we want to wait until the horse is out of the barn before we take action? I don't think so. We found that the administration did not perform a full security control assessment before Healthcare.gov opened for business on October 1st. We've also learned that just days before Healthcare.gov went live, senior officials at HHS expressed serious concerns regarding the protection of personally identifiable information that was entered into their website. These facts, on top of the fact that the administration has repeatedly misrepresented the functionality and the readiness of the healthcare law, raise significant questions regarding the security of Healthcare.gov and the information available in the exchanges. A few weeks ago, the administration was willing to let millions of Americans lose their health insurance despite the president's solemn promise that they could keep their health plan if they liked it. And it took the House, acting in a bipartisan legislative manner, for the administration to confess that, yes, it had broken their promise. Now the administration is saying it opposes this requirement, that it notify Americans when personal information is stolen. The self-proclaimed most transparent... Could I have an additional 30 seconds?
Yield an additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman's recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
So the self-proclaimed most transparent administration in history has come out against transparency. I'm sorry. Republicans and Democrats may disagree on the merits of the president's health care law, and we do. But I think that we should all agree that Americans deserve to be notified if that personal information is put at risk by the law. I want to thank Chairman Pitts for putting security and transparency above politics, and I would urge my colleagues in a bipartisan way to support this bill this morning. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Crowley.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my friend from New Jersey for yielding me this time. Mr. Speaker, there are so many truly pressing issues facing our nation. So it's a shame that we're here once again wasting time on legislation like this. It doesn't even solve the issues the Republicans claim they're trying to address. The truth is, the bill we're considering today is far from a productive answer to anything. It's just yet another scare tactic to discourage people from obtaining health care. That's right. Here's a newsflash for you. The Republicans want to stop people from obtaining health care. I don't know why we should expect anything less or anything else from a party with such little vision. Instead of creating opportunity, they've become the party that shuts things down. They shut down the government. They shut down unemployment insurance for people who are desperately trying to find work. They've tried repeatedly to shut down the Affordable Care Act. As a matter of fact, 47 times they've attempted to shut down the Affordable Care Act. Heck, they're even shutting down bridges in New Jersey. The fact is, it seems like their agenda is just about shutting down things that actually work for American families. Republicans can't just slam the door shut again and again on the American people. It's time to end this shutdown mentality once and for all here in Washington and get back to working on issues of concern to the entire nation. And Mr. Pallone, with that, I will yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire of the time remaining?
The gentleman has 13 minutes, and there is 6.5 for Mr. Pallone from New Jersey.
At this time, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the Vice Chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn.
Gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When is this administration finally going to start paying attention to the warning signs? When career staff at OMB warned the administration that Solyndra wasn't ready for prime time, they moved forward anyway and lost hardworking taxpayers $500 million when private consultants told the White House and HHS officials last spring that there were problems with Healthcare.gov. They moved forward anyway. And when CMS sent a memo just 4 days before Healthcare.gov went live and warned about inherent security risk, their terminology, the administration moved forward anyway. So their failed policy of forward is costing us money and is getting people into trouble. So this is what we're hearing from an Experian report. America's personal information is at high risk on Healthcare.gov. There is a great opportunity for data breach. This is something we can stop. The bill today does that. It is simple. It addresses the problem. What it does very simply, and I commend the gentleman from Pennsylvania for the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act. It accomplishes what this administration has failed to do, and to make a standard practice. It will force HHS to inform anyone if their information has been breached. And they have to do this within 2 business days. They can't hide it. They can't spin it. They've got to tell you if your information has been breached. We do this because if the administration is going to require us, and yes, to my colleagues, it is a requirement to use Healthcare.gov, at least they can notify you when your information has been breached. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Tennessee's time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the distinguished gentleman. I thank the manager of this legislation, and I thank the good intentions of our colleagues. I want to pause for a moment, Mr. Pallone, and just simply say that although these are important issues, as a member of the House Judiciary Committee, I helped draft the Privacy, the Patriot Act and Business Records 215, and now looking to constrain the collection of mega data. I accept the importance of privacy for the American people, but I pause for just a moment to ask my colleagues that we have enough time today to actually pass the extension of the unemployment benefits. 1.3 million people, 12,000 in my own community, would like us to stay here and make sure that we get that done. And I hope that my friends on the other side of the aisle will accept the challenge. Republicans putting an extension of the unemployment benefits on the floor to help unemployed Americans. But this is an important issue as well. But I do want to say that our friends have not documented any breach on personal and private data of those individuals that have accessed the Affordable Care Act, which, by the way, are 9 million plus and growing. We have had 46 plus votes to repeal it. Now we come one by one with legislation that has not gone through regular orders, not going through the committee process, has very good intentions, but in actuality may be overly burdensome. Because, Mr. Speaker, there is no limit for HHS to provide notice for any possible breach within seconds or minutes or hours after the incident may have occurred. Frankly, this legislation doesn't go far enough. Let me give you a few facts. The Affordable Care Act implementation of Healthcare.gov is under the authority of HHS. HHS assigned the task for developing Healthcare.gov to Agency's Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Under the Federal Privacy Act, all federal agencies must draft regulations to protect personally identifiable information under their control. The Federal Privacy Act was established by an act of Congress and concurrence of the executive branch to balance the government's need to maintain personal information on Americans with the right of individuals to be protected against unwarranted invasions of their privacy. The Privacy Act came as a direct result of the work of the Church Committee following revelations that the government had routinely used records on citizens for political purposes to engage in surveillance or retaliatory activity, a series of laws passed by the Congress to protect the privacy of Americans. Computer records management was of such grave concern to this Congress, to members of Congress, following investigations into disclosures that then-President Nixon had used his high office to seek out means to exact retribution against political enemies by causing harm to careers, reputations, as well as financial injury through the IRS. Can I get an additional 30 seconds or a minute? You have it.
I yield the gentlewoman additional minute.
Gentlewoman is recognized for an additional minute.
So we have had a intense interest in records and computers and the rights of citizens, which was produced in 1973. HHS is chiefly responsible for why the United States became the first nation in the world to draft a federal privacy law. They know what to do. There is a code of fair information practices that has 5 principles, one of which says there must be no personal data record-keeping systems whose very existence is secret. That is to not use the data of people in the wrong way. There is a CMS Policy for Privacy Act, and I offer this for the record. The baseline of what my point is that HHS was at the core of developing privacy. There have been no known breaches. There is no bar for CMS and HHS to tell the American public or the individual immediately. This bill will add burdensome requirements and may distract or take away from legal and lawful and law enforcement investigations. I ask that we look at this together in a bipartisan manner. I believe in privacy. I hope we can work together, Mr. Pallone, and make this what it should be, but I think the American people are protected.
Gentlelady's
and with
time
that,
has
I yield
expired.
back. Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished chairman of the Republican Study Committee, member of Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Scalise of Louisiana.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for yielding and for bringing the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act. And Mr. Speaker, all we're saying here is if American families' personal information is stolen through this website, through the exchange website, they ought to be notified by the administration that their data was breached. And of course, you've got the White House actually coming out and saying that they veto this bill. What does the Obama administration have against protecting the privacy of American families' personal information? You've got administration officials that testified before our committees. Chief Information Security Officer actually said there is also no confidence that personal identifiable information will be protected. Well, if they can't assure the protection, and by the way, the individual mandate says this is not an option for American families, they have to go through this exchange to get insurance that's approved by the government. So if the government's going to mandate it, we don't want the government to mandate that they have to go do this, but the government is mandating it, and if they're going to mandate it, they ought to at least be able to ensure that their data is protected, and if it's breached, they ought to notify them that this has happened, and yet they'd issue a veto threat against this. We need to pass this legislation, put this transparency in law, pass this bill. I yield back the balance of my
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume. He has 2.5 minutes left on his time.
Mr. Speaker, once again, I hear my colleagues on the other side repeating the same things that are not accurate. You do not have to go on Healthcare.gov to sign up for health insurance. You know, Mr. Waxman said you can go to a private insurance broker. You can call an 800 number. You can go through various nonprofits. I mean, they just keep repeating the same thing, and we keep having to say there have been no breaches. The gentleman mentioned the administration. The administration statement, which I read before, and I'll only summarize part of it now, it says that the federal government has already put in place an effective and efficient system for securing personally identifiable information in the health insurance marketplace. The administration opposes the bill because it would create unrealistic and costly paperwork requirements that do not improve the safety or security of personally identifiable information in the health insurance marketplace. The purpose of the bill, I understand, but it's simply not necessary, and it's just making people fearful of signing up. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Gardner.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker and I thank the Chairman of the committee for his good work, and I would remind our colleagues that when you call the 800 number to sign up for the exchange policies, as was heard before our committee in testimony, the people who get that number on that phone call then turn around and use the Healthcare.gov site, the information, the website, to input that information. So you are forced to go through this site. You know, a couple of weeks ago I received this letter. We are writing to you because an electronic file containing your personal information cannot be accounted for. The file included 2 or more of the following: your name, home mailing address, and social security number. The letter went on to say, we wanted to alert you to the potential that someone not authorized to access the records could have seen this information. This letter came from the state of Colorado. This letter from the state of Colorado because they couldn't hold on to state employees' private, personal identification information. All we're asking for is that we protect the privacy, the security of the American people. To oppose this bill, to issue a veto threat. If the site is secure, they'll never receive the notice. If it's not, we will have acted to protect the American people. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'll reserve. I only have a minute left. I don't know how many speakers you have left. Or
how many speakers we have? We have several.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves.
We have 3.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, the independent contractor said it was unable to adequately test the confidentiality and integrity of the system. They said no complete end-to-end testing was done. The chief information security officer recommended not launching it. Her boss refused to sign the authority to operate, and they launched it anyway. They knew, the administration knew this website wasn't ready. They launched it anyway. The whole country knew it wasn't, now knows it wasn't ready. They launched it anyway, put millions of people's personal information at risk, and they did it for political reasons. And now all we're asking is when there's a breach, when there's a problem, at least tell the American citizens. You already launched a website for political reasons that you knew it wasn't ready, put millions of Americans' personal information at risk. You already did that. Now we're saying if there's a problem, at least tell them. That's all this bill does. And what's the administration say? We're going to veto that bill if it happens. You've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. That's all this is about. And so I want to commend Mr. Pitts, the committee, and those individuals who put work into this. It's a good piece of legislation, and I would urge a yes vote.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey continue to reserve. Gentleman from New Jersey continues to reserve. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Speaker, at this time I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished Secretary of our caucus, Ms. Jenkins, gentlelady from Kansas.
The gentlelady from Kansas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Health care is a personal issue, and many Kansans are worried about submitting their sensitive and private information into a system that can't protect them against the devastating consequences of security breaches and fraud. Experts have repeatedly raised red flags about the security of the information people are submitting to the Obamacare exchanges, and a former Social Security administrator even described the website as a hacker's dream. Important questions about the website security remain unanswered, and Americans, especially those who have lost their plans due to the president's health care law, deserve some peace of mind that their information is safe from cyber thieves. I urge my colleagues to support this bill that requires HHS to notify Americans within 2 business days if their personal information has been compromised. Much more is required of private sector companies whose products are not mandated by law. The least the administration can do is notify Americans if their information has been stolen or unlawfully accessed through the Obamacare exchange. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserved. Gentleman from New Jersey continues to reserve. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Walorski.
Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
To enact much-needed consumer protections for Healthcare.gov. It's unfair that the Department of HHS launched Healthcare.gov without performing a complete security control assessment. Installing the necessary safeguards for the exchanges should have been the administration's top priority. Now Congress has an opportunity to pass a law that simply requires HHS to notify consumers within 2 business days if their personal information is unlawfully accessed or stolen. In a digital world, Americans deserve to know their information is compromised so they can immediately take action to protect themselves. Last summer, I traveled my entire district in Indiana to notify and to make aware cybersecurity issues and steps to avoid identity theft. Hoosiers in Indiana, especially seniors, shared with me frightening stories about fraud and scams. They need to know that Healthcare.gov will not contribute to the cybersecurity dilemma. This is the kind of representation they deserve in Congress. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense law to safeguard our personal information. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from New Jersey continues to reserve. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
We're prepared to close.
Gentleman from New Jersey is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to say again, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to some kind of security notification. In fact, it already exists, and there is a protocol in place with the Department of Health and Human Services. The point is that this Republican bill is simply not necessary. That security already exists. The fact of the matter is there have not been any security breaches. And once again, we're simply seeing the Republicans get up and try to scare people so that they don't go and use Healthcare.gov, the website. What we'd really like to see, Mr. Speaker, is a day when on both sides of the aisle here we can simply get up and talk about legislation that continues to provide outreach and encourage people to sign up for the website and get the health insurance that they need. I still honestly believe that most Republicans and Democrats collectively would like to see most Americans covered with health insurance. That was the purpose of the Affordable Care Act. And I think my one optimistic note today could be at least we're not seeing another bill on the floor that would seek to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Hopefully that's some recognition on the Republican side that the Affordable Care Act is actually accomplishing its goal of trying to cover most Americans, if not all Americans. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will say I would urge my colleagues to oppose this unnecessary bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, some have argued that requiring HHS to report a data breach that is known to have resulted in a loss of personal identifiable information within 2 days is too burdensome for the department. In fact, the administration opposes this legislation for, quote, paperwork requirements, end quote. I'm frankly shocked that any member of this body would put workload concerns of HHS ahead of their constituents' right to know if their data has been breached, when many of our constituents are essentially being forced to shop through these exchanges. In addition, CMS has stated that states and other non-exchange entities are required to report data breaches to the department within 1 hour to HHS. If HHS believes 1 hour is enough time to report, then they should certainly be able to tell our constituents within 2 days after knowing an individual's information was breached through an exchange. Our constituents deserve to know if their personal information has been breached. That is all the underlying bill requires. Our constituents have a right to know. They should have peace of mind, and we should be protecting them, the victims, not the bureaucracy. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense, important bill and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 455, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The question on engrossment and third reading of the bill, those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to require notification of individuals of breaches of personally identifiable information through exchanges under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act.
The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, we would ask for a recorded vote.
The gentleman ask for the yeas and nays. The gentleman requests the yeas and nays. The gentleman's nays and yeas are requested. Those favoring will go up by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays orders. Members record their vote. So by electronic device, this is a 15-minute vote. vote, the yeas are 291, the nays are 122. The bill is passed without objection. Motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.